Hi, welcome to Speech Language with Miss Holly. Thanks for joining me today for this video. Let's go ahead and get started. So today's skill that we're going to work on is summarizing. That's where we take the main idea of something and we find key details to support it, and then we put it together and we get a summary. So for this activity, we'll start with a little preview and then we'll actually go through and practice. Along the way, we might find some important vocabulary words that we can unpack. So here's our summary organizer. Like I said, we've got our main idea to start, and then we're also going to find important details and fill this out as we go. Let's go ahead and jump down to the article. We're just going to start by taking a walk through it, not reading anything too much in depth. We have the source of the article up here, the title, the author, the date it was published. This looks like an introduction. And then underneath that, we have a series of headers and sections that are bolded. And this article actually goes for a while. We're not going to read it all together, but we can use this article walkthrough to help us figure out our summary. So even before we read it entirely, I'm thinking, if we pull this up here, the title here and the intro are going to give us most of our main idea. So I'll color code that here, the main idea. Whereas the supporting details are underneath in blue in the paragraph headers. So just some quick tips on finding a summary of an article. Now let's actually start to read what the article is talking about. So it's an article from the New York Times, and the title is, "I Spent a Year in Space and I Have Tips on Isolation to Share." Take it from someone who couldn't go outside. By Scott Kelly. So he's a retired NASA astronaut, and if we start just with the intro, it starts with something that lots of us can relate to here. Since being stuck at home can be challenging, and he has experience being alone on the International Space Station for nearly a year here, he found some things that were helpful during his time. And so with these tips, as we all confine ourselves at home to help stop the spread of the coronavirus, he wants to share a few tips on living in isolation. Okay, so that actually gives us a lot of information to go off of our summary. You can pause and start thinking about this yourself. I will go ahead and start writing down the main idea that I got just from the title and the intro so far. Now, actually, before we even jump into the supporting details, I want to unpack a few of the words that we talked about. We have the word isolation, and we have the word tips. So, we pop down here, isolation. Another word for isolation is being alone. So that's something that means the same thing. We could also say this as separation. That's one word to describe isolation. Right now, lots of us are experiencing a certain amount of isolation since we aren't going to school. We're isolated at home. We're living in isolation. We aren't going with big crowds to events. Whereas the opposite of isolation, an antonym, is being together. So right now we are not being together with other people. We do not have contact with other people. So an antonym for isolation would be contact. You can be in isolation from other people. You can be in physical contact. All right, so we unpacked that word, isolation there. maybe you were familiar with it. Maybe this gave you a better understanding. And now I want to unpack a word that we probably hear pretty frequently, and that is tips. All right, so this word has a lot of different meanings. When the astronaut shared that he wanted to share tips, what do you think it means in that context? If somebody's sharing tips, do we think they're helpful? I don't think so. So it's like a helpful hint or suggestion. He's giving us tips for what to do when we're in isolation. Somebody might give you tips on how to do your math homework. Can you think of any other meanings for tips? Because there are multiple meanings here. Another meaning for tips is a kind of money that you pay to somebody to say thank you. Like when you are going out to eat. Tips are a form of payment that you can give your waiter or waitress to say thank you for their service. Can you think of any other kinds of tips? I'm also thinking of a pointy surface, like a tip of a pencil. We've got pencil tips here. So lots of different words, lots of different meanings for the word tips here. All right, so now let's go back, see if we can find a few key details. Like I said, you can read this article in full. There will be a link in the description, and you can find the key details that stick out most to you. I'm going to highlight the three first ones that stuck out to me. So he suggests following a schedule, he suggests pacing yourself, and he suggests going outside. So these are 3 tips for living in isolation. Following a schedule is the first one. You can think about, why would following a schedule help you in isolation? Following a schedule. Maintaining a plan will help you adjust to a different work and home life environment. So it's just getting used to something new, and having structure can be helpful. He also says, we scroll down here, he says to pace yourself. Now let's unpack what that means. I think this is a really helpful tip. Pace is kind of like the speed that you take something at. So if we think of living in isolation as like a race, for instance, do you think that we are sprinting this race, going as fast as we possibly can, or do you think we're taking this more like a marathon? I'd agree that we are taking it more like a marathon, taking it slowly, one day at a time. And this last tip that we're going to talk about here is going outside. And after being confined to a small space, we really start to crave nature and fresh air. So I'm going to put this in my own words as get fresh air. So these are 3 supporting details that help convey the main idea, which is an astronaut who's sharing his experience of living alone, and he wants to give us tips on how to make it through isolation. All right, so that was our activity for today. Please feel free to read the article in more depth, see if any of those tips stand out to you. Thanks, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.